Hello everyone, today we have on a very special guest, Miss Kathleen Simms. She is an expert in Lyme disease and works in raising awareness about it, especially within Carroll County and surrounding counties. Miss Simms, how are you today?
I'm great. Beautiful fall weather. Glad we're here today.
Yeah, it's a beautiful location that you have and happy to be able to sit down with you. My first question is, where did your interest in Lyme disease start?
Boy, that's a great way to start. I knew nothing about Lyme disease, and most people don't until it personally affects them.
Right.
My son got very ill after a visit up here to Carroll County with us for Easter back in 2013. And he lived in Charlotte. He had graduated college and was getting his career off the ground. And he came up here for a long weekend for Easter. And after that, went home, and within about a week, had a few symptoms, felt flu-like, didn't feel very well, had never noticed that anything had bitten him, didn't get any kind of rashes, but went to his doctor, and the doctor said, oh, it sounds like the flu, and basically gave him, a Z-pack of antibiotics and sent him on his way. But things got worse and worse, and as time progressed from Easter until maybe summer, he had, and I didn't see him every week, so I didn't know he was struggling so much, but he finally confided in me, Mom, I've been so fatigued that I'm finding that I'm coming home from work on my lunch break, which he lived literally, a block from where he worked. And he said, I'm coming home on my lunch break, instead of eating, I'm falling across my bed and taking a nap. And he said, twice I have not woken up till the end of the day. And my office was trying to reach me and I couldn't even hear my phone. He said, I was just zonked out. And he said, I just don't feel well. So that started a whole process of us trying to determine what was going on with him. Because for a young kid in his mid-20s or early 20s, there can be lots of explanations for things like this, and your mind goes to all the worst ones, like cancers, But we had a great doctor in Charlotte, and he really did do everything he knew to do. But what I came to learn after all of this is, and this was already more than 10 years ago, so things have changed, but 10 years ago, you didn't see Lyme disease much in Charlotte, which is where he lived, and his doctors did not know what they were looking at. Right. Testing for Lyme disease is very inadequate. It's highly unreliable. And many in the medical community did not know that back then. Much more, that information's become much more available to practitioners now. And so they know not to trust the test. They'll still test, but if it's negative and you still have symptoms, they'll kind of know something is a possibility. Yeah. Whereas when he got sick, they said it's a negative test. Can't be Lyme disease, let's keep looking. Right. And he was fully worked up for so many things, and we went to Duke, and this was a year of our life of trying to find out why he was falling apart. He was literally losing his life to this disease, and it was very scary. And then one day I happened to be, I worked with the Backpack Buddy program in Galax, which was a great group of people. And every time we got together, we'd form a circle before we would start packing backpacks, and we'd say a little prayer for all the kids that were going to get the backpacks. And then we would say, does anybody have any special prayer they'd like to request? And I raised my hand and I said, my son has been sick for months now, and we cannot find answers as to what's going on with him. And I'm just going to ask y'all to keep Zach in your prayers. Well, a woman approached me after that, and she said, I really think what you're describing sounds like Lyme disease. And she said, we had it in my family, and it's just so exact like what you're saying. So she was my first clue, and I knew nothing about Lyme disease. And so I went to the computer and I began to research and read, and I tumbled into a world that I had no idea existed. It's almost like, especially at that time, things have improved, but over 10 years ago, it was like an alternate universe. And if you weren't in it, you had no clue it was even there. Lyme disease was not well recognized, especially in the South. Even back then, they thought this was just a disease that existed in the Northeast. And the question would be, well, have you traveled to New York or New Jersey, or have you been in the Northeast? And if you hadn't been, they would say, well, where would you have gotten Lyme disease? Well, now we know Lyme disease exists in every state in this union. Not only in every state, it exists in every country. and in every continent except the Antarctic, the one with all the really deep, freezy, cold stuff, because ticks don't survive in the real extreme colds.
Right, okay.
So, you know, we just didn't know that it was prevalent or a problem up here until I started talking to people, and I started picking the brains of the folks that I would meet at church, and I started bringing it up everywhere. What do you know about Lyme disease? And I was shocked to discover that even though the medical community here in Carroll County wasn't very aware of Lyme disease, the veterinary community was.
Yes.
And because this is something that was making a lot of dogs sick in Carroll County, and actually a lot of people were losing their animals because you get to a point where if you haven't started treatment quickly enough, the dog will die. Yeah. And so one of my friends at church was Dr. Mark Strauss, and he was a veterinarian at Hillsville Veterinary Clinic. And, you know, he was a good resource for me. And I just started doing as much digging and reading as I could because I was watching my son get sicker and sicker. And in the end, he did have a very serious, I don't think infestation's the right word, but he did have a serious infection that was systemic, and mostly it went to his brain and nervous system. And there was damage done, and there was very serious illness there. We were concerned all the time about seizures, and there were things that were just not, you know, explainable because they would be so different. Like one day his pain would be on his left side, one day his pain would be on his right side, one day his foot would hurt, one day his head would hurt. It was just various and sundry things that kept happening, and you just feel like you're in this nightmare. Right. But the more I learned, the more I understood that Lyme disease is a multisystemic infection. And the little bacteria that causes Lyme disease, it's a spirochete bacteria, which makes it a corkscrew shape. And what it likes to do is it likes to kind of corkscrew itself down, screw itself down into whatever it finds appealing. And some of the bacteria, they really want to get into the joints. They like the synovial fluid. Other of the bacteria, they'll actually settle in the brain, which is what happened to my son. For many patients, the bacteria will settle into the heart and they'll get cardiac issues. So it's really dependent on what the bug itself wants to eat. And it does burrow down deeply. One reason why testing is so unreliable is because the bacteria doesn't stay in your bloodstream very long. Pretty much after it's kind of circulated through your entire bloodstream, it begins its burrowing process. And so if you do a blood test and you're looking for it, and it's already been 6 weeks since you had the bite, it's not going to be in your blood anymore, and the test is going to be negative. So this is a real problem, and doctors weren't recognizing that. The CDC wasn't recognizing that. Fortunately, things have really begun to change, and hopefully they're going to change even further in the next 10 years. There's been a lot more attention to Lyme disease. More celebrities have gotten Lyme disease. More doctors are coming forward and discussing Lyme disease. And we have an association now that was formed way back in the beginning called the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society. And that's ILADS. And they are the ones that are supporting the research. They now have a doctor program where they were trained doctors who want to just focus on this disease and treat it. They've come up with the best protocols of what's working. A lot of this has been trial and error. A lot of these doctors are on the forefront of trying to figure out what the standard of care needs to be for this disease. It's very difficult because of the way it affects everybody so differently. Right. I have friends here in Carroll County who deal with Lyme disease, and it's only an arthritis of their knee or only an arthritis in their ankle. And it bothers them, but yet they go about their daily lives and they live their lives, and they're just like, oh, there's that Lyme again, making my knee swell. Because the thing is, once it's in your body and you haven't treated immediately after being bitten, and it becomes systemic, there's no getting it out of your body completely. You do want to treat for it, but the treatment really is to bring down the bacterial load so that your immune system kicks in and does what it's designed to do. In the beginning of an infection, the bacteria will just overload your immune system. I kind of liken it to prisoners in a big prison who overrun the fences, and there's not enough guards to catch them all. Right. And so if your immune system's defenses are down, then the bacteria spreads even further into the body, which is why early detection and treatment, and adequate treatment is really, really important. So these are just the things that I'll stop and take a breath in case you have a question you want to ask me. But it's a very complicated illness in that it is so different in every single person. And we need more doctors to recognize the classic signs and symptoms and be able to help patients quicker so that they don't have to get as sick as my son got.
Yeah. So you mentioned treatment. What does the long-term treatment look like versus the short-term treatment?
Short-term treatment is very, very simple. Everybody pretty much agrees on it by now. It's doxycycline, and for patients who cannot take the antibiotic doxycycline, they recommend amoxicillin. And you take a course of it for 6 weeks. That's your bare minimum. Some doctors, and I'm kind of a little unhappy with 1 or 2 in Carroll County, haven't gotten the message, and they'll still just want to give you maybe 2 weeks of an antibiotic, and that's not going to be enough. That's going to, you know, kind of allow the bacteria to flourish and not really get addressed the way it should get addressed. You want to treat for the life cycle of the bacteria, which is 4 weeks, 28 days. So you want to give a little more antibiotic than the 28 days because you don't know when you start the antibiotic where you're catching the life cycle of every bacteria.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But if you follow through for 6 whole weeks, you've covered enough of the life cycle that it should be killed. And that way it's an acute infection, it's done, you don't have any after effects, you don't have anything to worry about. It's very simple, very cut and dried. We just need to get the word out that the ILADS doctors and our researchers have been able to show that we need a minimum of 6 weeks of antibiotics. If I could get that message out to several doctors in Carroll County, I'd be thrilled because some of them are still just given the 2 weeks. So this is a huge cautionary tale for people. It's great you had a doctor who wanted to give you doxycycline or amoxicillin, but if you don't take it for the right length of time, you may become one of these patients with a chronic infection that you're going to have to live with the rest of your life. Chronic Lyme disease is a lot more complicated because of where it settles and because of how each patient has their own individual DNA and immune system. No 2 people are going to have the same types of systems, and so the treatments are not going to all work. What works for me may not work for you. So there's a little there's a little more leeway in how you can treat a chronic infection, and practitioners that do this as their sole medical practice, they have protocols that they have tried in their patients that they get the most success with, and so they'll start with those. And the doctors in ILADS and the researchers, they have periodic meetings. They're about to gather again in another 2 weeks, where people come from literally all over the world to come to these conferences and to learn what the latest research is showing and who the doctors are that are seeing the most progress in getting people that are chronically ill feeling better. You can use antibiotics in long-term treatment for chronic Lyme disease, but that's a little controversial because, you know, we do have antibiotic resistance in this country, and that comes from doctors way back in the 70s and 60s when antibiotics became more prevalent. They gave antibiotics for everything. And you're not supposed to do that. They gave antibiotics for every mother who came in with a child with a runny nose and wanted to, you know, the doctor to do something. So the doctor would give them an antibiotic. But in reality, antibiotics don't work on viruses, which is what colds are. So the children that were given too many antibiotics, I was probably a child in the 60s who got too many antibiotics because now I have allergies. Now I don't tolerate a lot of antibiotics. So you do want to be careful with antibiotics, but they can be very useful in the treatment of chronic Lyme disease when they're given in the right combinations with one another. You have to know what the combinations are by a practitioner who really knows how to effectively use them, and then for a limited period of time. Doctors now have developed enough other medications that can work on Lyme disease. It doesn't always have to be antibiotics. And you have to give Johns Hopkins credit in Baltimore. They've done research studies, and they're really getting on board with trying to get to the bottom of this problem, just like Duke University, Tulane University, University of Minnesota. There are a lot of people working on this problem now. So there's a lot of hope that maybe 10 years we'll have a more standardized treatment program. But for now, I personally believe, and what I've seen work for a lot of people, is antibiotics for a period of time in a chronic case, maybe 6 months, maybe a year if you're really getting improvements, in addition to other things you do to support your liver and build your immune system. And so for people that don't want to do antibiotics more than a few weeks, there are a lot of people who are leery of antibiotics and they're like, I could never do that for 6 months.
Yeah.
I will remind people that there are some diseases for which a year of antibiotics is the treatment, and one in particular is tuberculosis. You get tuberculosis, you're going to be on rifampin for 12 months. That's just the way it is. That's how you beat tuberculosis. I once had an infection years ago, back when I was a younger woman, and it could not be cleared by regular antibiotics. And I was sent to an infectious disease doctor who put me on an actual PICC line, which is they actually go into your arm and they thread a line into your into your heart, basically, and they administer antibiotics. It's like a port. Okay. A lot of people get these for cancer treatments. I had a PICC line, and I received antibiotics for this infection that was a kidney infection, and I was on antibiotics for 6 months. And this is what it took to get rid of that particular infection and save my kidney. So people are leery of long-term antibiotics, but there really are times when they're very necessary. In chronic Lyme disease, long-term antibiotics can be very beneficial to a lot of people. But again, I understand the reluctance of some people to think of the idea of being on antibiotics for more than a week or two. There are other treatment options that are available to folks, and some of them are prescription medications that you combine with other herbs. We've got a lot of research now in herbal medicine that's very encouraging, that shows how to use herbs medicinally. The Chinese have been doing this for over 1,000 years. Chinese herbal medicine is very well accepted, and that's the norm in the whole of China, as opposed to the way we treat Western allopathically medicine here in America. And there's just a lot of good information coming from some very good scientists who take the time to study the herbs. A lot of study being done in this direction. And what they're kind of finding is if you combine the antibiotics with the herbs, and then you kind of gradually transition over to all herbs and other supportive things for your immune system, you can get good results also. But most of the practitioners who treat Lyme disease, they'll tell you these are your options, these are the various things you can do to treat, and then the doctor and the patient will decide what's the patient's comfort level with doing what they want to do. The doctor will say, this is what I've seen work, this is what I would recommend, and if the doctor wants to hold you to what he thinks is the best thing to do and you don't want to do it, then you find another doctor. But most doctors understand that because there is no one definition of the best treatment of chronic Lyme disease, they understand that people are going to want to look at all the options, and because nobody can say one thing is the thing yet.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Who are the local practitioners who are commonly treating Lyme disease?
Well, I really like Susan Roberts.
Okay.
In Fancy Gap Medical. Okay. She understands the importance of giving 3 weeks of antibiotics and a refill for 3 more weeks, which I think is just so valuable. She's like my favorite practitioner here. But Dr. Menzies at Hillsville Family Care will also treat appropriately. Okay. There's a Dr. Lazo. I don't know him, haven't had any interaction with him, but he's in Galax, and I understand he will treat for the 6 weeks. And then there's a doctor over in Floyd County, and her name escapes me. But anybody who wants this information that's not on the tip of my tongue can contact me after this podcast. Yeah. I have become a bit of a patient advocate, and that was out of necessity because there was really no one around me that could answer the questions I needed answered when my son was basically dying from this disease. He was really very, very sick. We went to Duke, and Duke couldn't help us. Right. I mean, this is, since that time, Duke has been developing a Lyme treatment center, and Duke is in on the research now too. So we were just a little too early to get any help that we really needed around here, unfortunately. And the closest doctor to help us when my son was finally diagnosed was in Chapel Hill. And so we would make that trek from Charlotte to Chapel Hill because my son still lived in Charlotte and I was staying with him. He got to a point where he needed care and help, and we tried really hard to keep him on his own down in Charlotte for a long time, thinking if we just got the right treatment, he would turn it around and he would start doing better and feeling better. And we were reluctant to, have him have to give up everything he had built up in Charlotte and come to be here with us. Eventually he did have to do that, but in that first year we were trying hard to keep him there. So we would make the long trek from Charlotte to Chapel Hill very regularly, and that was the closest doctor. And now he would, if it happened today, he would have had options in Charlotte, but back then there were no doctor options in Charlotte.
You'd mentioned local veterinarians being more familiar with Lyme disease than local doctors. I find that interesting. My dog actually has Lyme disease. And then a couple months ago, one of my close friends was diagnosed, and thankfully he caught it early enough within like the first week or two that he was bit, and it bulleted up, so it was fairly obvious they were able to treat it. But I didn't really realize that it wasn't as well medically documented as it should have been.
Right. And it's so interesting. Dog blood and human blood are different. Dog testing for Lyme disease is very accurate. You bring a sick dog into the veterinarian, they do the blood work, boom, they know right away. There's no guessing about it. It's just different in the human body, and testing just doesn't work the same way. But if you have an animal that has Lyme disease, they can get very, very sick. And like I said, I know some that have lost pets to Lyme disease. And most of the veterinarians, Carly Stillwell, who is oh my goodness, I'm losing the name of her practice, the veterinary practice she's with. But most of the veterinarians now are very aware of Lyme disease, and not only Lyme disease, but a more common infection that comes along with Lyme disease and happens in a lot of dogs and cats is Bartonella. And Bartonella can be a standalone disease. It just so happens that it sometimes lives in the tick also. Ticks are just germy, nasty things. They're just germy. And it's never just going to be one germ in that tick. Years ago, 40 years ago, when Lyme disease was first being recognized as some kind of a problem, there was probably only Lyme disease in the tick. But now things have evolved to the point, especially with global warming, that the ticks are just picking up lots of other stuff too. Bartonella is a disease that has many more vectors. Lyme disease only has the tick as its vector. Bartonella has ticks, fleas, sandflies, horseflies, and cat scratches, because what happens is the cats and dogs who scratch themselves that have fleas, they pick up the flea dust in their nails. And then if they scratch you with those nails, which is more common with cats than dogs, if they scratch you and draw blood, they can transmit what's in their claws into your bloodstream. So consequently, a lot of veterinarians now have Bartonella, and so they're just very aware of it. And the medical community for humans just hadn't caught on to that. But Lyme disease never travels alone anymore. And I like to say it gets lonely, it brings along its friends. And some of the friends of Lyme disease that you can almost always count on being in that same tick are going to be ehrlichiosis, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, a terrible disease that's similar to malaria called babesia. There's a rickettsia. There's a wide variety, alpha-gal, which people are hearing more about alpha-gal now. You can get alpha-gal by itself, but it can also come in on the tick with Lyme disease. So Lyme disease brings along what we call its friends. We call them the co-infections. And this makes things just so much more complicated, because a sick patient may show up at a doctor's office, and even if the doctor recognizes he has Lyme disease, but it's been too long past the initial infection and these other diseases are present, now they're circulating in the body, and each infection needs a little bit different treatment. So that's why you need to look for a specialist who understands that it's not just Lyme disease anymore. If you've gone beyond the initial, probably 6 to 8 weeks after the bite. If you catch it, like your friend, he got the bullseye rash, he had a suspicion, oh, there's Lyme disease, he got on the antibiotics, that doxycycline will kill everything. It'll kill everything right there from the get-go, which is why it's so important to get the antibiotics immediately after you know you've been bitten. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people don't know they've been bitten. The bullseye rash that your friend got, he was lucky to get, that rash only appears in 20% of cases. Now, prior to probably 8 years ago, doctors were taught in medical school, you have to always have the bullseye rash to have Lyme disease.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
So if you don't have the bullseye rash, don't worry about it. No, science has proved that is incorrect. In reality, only 20% of people with Lyme are ever going to get that rash. And if the tick bites you in a place that you don't see, like the back of your knee, back of your neck, on your back,
The hair.
you may not know it's been there. So anytime, I tell people, anytime you begin to develop flu-like symptoms or headaches, but it doesn't go away within a week or so, suspect Lyme disease. Even if you didn't see a tick, the vast majority of people infected with Lyme disease never see the tick that has infected them. So that's what makes it complicated, you know. Carrie, my husband, once had a case of Lyme disease and he didn't know about it. He had been working in our yard, which he does all the time. He had gone out to play a game of volleyball or pickleball or something at the gym, and he was changing shirts, and he pulled his shirt off, and somebody behind him said, "Dude, you've got a huge bullseye on your back." Well, he never looks at his back, you know? And when he went to the mirror, the bullseye was the entirety of his back. It was the biggest bullseye I'd ever seen. And he immediately called his doctor, which is Dr. John Tracy, and he's in Laurel Fork. And John Tracy immediately got him on doxycycline. Carrie never got the first symptom, never even felt flu-like, nothing, because it had literally probably just happened the day before working in the yard. So you can't wait for the bullseye rash, but if you get it, that's 100% guarantee you've been infected. You see that bullseye rash, think Lyme disease. But don't wait for a bullseye rash, because it's not going to come for the majority of people.
So your husband had mentioned to me that Carroll County is a hot spot for ticks, and specifically ticks infected with Lyme disease. Why is there a greater population of ticks here rather than surrounding counties?
Well, actually, it's not just Carroll, it's Floyd.
Okay.
There's a map. There's a at the University of Massachusetts, there's a tick center where they study ticks, they test ticks. And the University of Massachusetts has this website called Tick Check. And if you go to it, they list the stats for every state. There's like a map of the country of the United States, and you press on the state you're interested in, and it'll tell you how many confirmed cases of Lyme disease exist in that state. Well, when you click on the Virginia map, the biggest county is Northern Virginia, Loudoun County. They have a huge amount of people, I mean tens of thousands of people with Lyme disease in Loudoun County. But other than that, it's Floyd and Carroll. And I would probably venture to guess Grayson might also have problems. It's just that it's got such a smaller population. It's going to be fewer people by virtue of their population. I think it has a lot to do with our beautiful nature around us, and especially we have the Blue Ridge Parkway running through Floyd and Carroll. The parkway has a huge deer population, which is the carrier of the ticks. The deer tick does like to reside on the deer. And it's not just the deer tick that'll transmit Lyme disease, but that's a primary tick for this region of the country. Out west, you would have other types of ticks that would carry Lyme disease, but here it's traditionally the deer tick. And we have a lot of deer. And not just on the parkway. We have just a lot of deer going through downtown Hillsville. You know, you'll see in the middle of the day, oh, there's a deer right there by the school. So we just have a huge deer population, and that allows for the ticks to feed and drop off and get into the grasses and into the trees and into the areas where people walk and are easily, you know, latched onto.
Is there any way to reduce the tick population? Are there any species that specifically target ticks? And
you know, it's so interesting. They're working on a vaccine. There's all kinds of ideas. There's nothing concrete yet that you can do. You can have the exterminator come and spray your yard. It would be kind of expensive, and it's not real practical. I think golf courses might, you know, do something like that, but the average person's not going to pay to have their yard sprayed. And the best thing is prevention. You're not going to stop the tick population, the deer population, so you want to protect yourself. When you go out walking on a hike anywhere, if the grass is above your shoes, if it's going to be taller grass, you want to just assume ticks are there. So you want to have on socks and shoes. I spray anytime I'm going to walk on grass anywhere. I spray. I have two sprays. You can buy them at Walmart. There's lots of them on the market, but these are conveniently available at Walmart by a company called Repel, and they're in the sports section over there at Walmart where you buy your tennis balls and your soccer balls. And there's one of the sprays that is just for your shoes, socks, clothing. And then there's another spray that you can actually spray on your skin. So if I know I'm going to be outside in nature, I spray the shoes and the socks. And then I also spray the parts of skin that are going to be exposed. And I also I recommend wearing a hat. Like if you're going to be walking under a lot of trees, or if you're on a nature trail, it really helps to wear a baseball cap or some kind of a hat, because ticks are in the trees, and you might be the one person walking under a tree when that tick decides to drop off. There was a recent study that showed that ticks are attracted to the body heat of humans. And so it's like they can sense you're coming by them. And if they sense that body heat and you're within a foot of them, they'll jump onto you, and now you don't even know it. You don't feel them. They're teeny tiny. They're, some of them are like the size of a poppy seed. It's only the bigger dog ticks, which do not transmit Lyme disease, but they do transmit Rocky Mountain spotted fever. You'll know if you have a dog tick because they're so big. You've seen them on your own dog, I'm sure. And especially after they've fed, they get really nice sized. Deer ticks don't get so big, and it's very easy to miss them on your body. So I tell people prevention. You spray your socks and shoes, wear long pants, that helps. Cover your head, and do tick checks when you get home. If we've been out hiking on the parkway or somewhere, we come home, we kind of strip our clothes and get in the shower, and then we kind of just like, okay, you look where I can't see and I'll look where you can't see, and we'll just double check to make sure there's no ticks that have latched on anywhere. So prevention is the best thing that we have to offer right now, but they are working on things that would help reduce Lyme disease and ticks in that population. They've even come up with some idea of how they would give humans a vaccine that maybe if the tick latched onto you, it could die. Like if it bit you, it would get whatever that vaccine was in your bloodstream, and it would just drop off and die. That's who knows if that's ever going to come to anything. But there's all kinds of researchers right now trying to come up with ideas, because it's finally starting to get noticed that this is a very serious health problem. This is a global health problem. Some of our best doctors here in America have been invited to places like China and England to come and give presentations and educate their doctors. China, interestingly enough, was the most open to wanting our medical doctors here to come and tell them what we had learned, because Lyme disease is a huge issue in China. So it is global. And the more we can get on board with what we can do to either prevent, and if you can't prevent, if you do get bitten, get very prompt, accurate treatment. If we could do those things, we could reduce the population of people becoming chronically ill. Because once you become chronically ill, it can be a disabling condition. I never would have thought that my brilliant, wonderful, amazing son, and he really is, and I know I'm his mom and I got to say that, but he really is. I would never have thought that he would be on Social Security disability at the age of 28, but that's what's happened. He is permanently disabled from this infection. People don't know that that can happen. He's a lucky one, he lived. I actually know probably 6 people who have died from Lyme disease. And they generally die by seizures, and they die in their sleep. We worried about that for a long time with my son, and fortunately he never developed seizures. Like I said, the bug just didn't go to that part of the body to create seizures. But when people die, it's generally from seizures or suicide. There's a high suicide rate in the chronic illness community in general, but in the Lyme disease chronic community, there's a lot of suicide, because it's a miserable disease. You never feel well. You get robbed of your joy. You get robbed of your ability to do the things you used to want to do. You get robbed of your ability to work if you can't stand or do your job. You can become very crippled with chronic Lyme disease. And I think my reason for doing everything I do is to help prevent other people from becoming as sick as my son did. That's what brought me to becoming an advocate, because if I had known more, if we had acted quicker, if I had known what I know now, it's very possible my son would have never become this chronically ill. But we just did not know what we didn't know.
Are there any efforts to create a preventative vaccine for Lyme disease?
There is, and vaccines, you know, since COVID, vaccines are controversial.
Touchy topic, yeah.
You know, you know, everybody's entitled to their opinions about vaccines, but vaccines have saved the world from many major epidemics. And vaccines can be a very important thing. But there was controversy about a vaccine that was created back in the 80s for Lyme disease. It kind of backfired in that people felt like they got the vaccine and then they got symptoms of Lyme disease. And so there became a distrust over the vaccine. It was never scientifically proven that the vaccine gave anybody Lyme disease, but there were just people, you know how it is, the rumor mill gets started, and people lost confidence in the vaccine. The company began to lose money, and so they quit making the vaccine. So that was the only time we've had a vaccine for Lyme disease. It was called the Lymerix, and my own sister actually had it. And she lived in New York at the time where Lyme was very common, and she was in the healthcare field, and she got the vaccine. You know, and so, you know, she was happy to take the vaccine at the time, but once there was controversy about it and it was pulled from the market, nobody's ever attempted to come back out with it again. There's some talk that there's some people working on that, but I think they would have a big uphill battle to climb after COVID because of all the controversy that developed over the COVID vaccine. And so that's just kind of a hot button topic that a lot of people are just, they've got, you know, very far to the left or the right on the belief system. And it's hard now to get people to trust vaccines for various reasons, unfortunately.
Is the International Lyme and Associated Disease, is it association?
Yep, association.
Association. Is that something that they're working on or lobbying for?
They work on research and they support research of all types. There's a lot of doctors who are only doing research on this. We need more funding. That's the problem. The doctors who are doing the most research have been fortunate to get the best funding, and they're the ones that are getting us the best answers. Gosh, one of my favorite researchers is at Tulane in New Orleans, and she's brought a lot of good proof to the picture that's going to help get mainstream medicine more on board with what Lyme disease and chronic Lyme disease really is. And she's just got great funding at Tulane. There's a private foundation called the Cohen Foundation that supports a couple of researchers. And there's another great researcher at the University of Minnesota, Marna Erickson. And the doctors that get the research funding can get the work done. There's just not enough of it available. So some of the studies end up being rather small. You know, a lot of times, you know, they'll give you a little money here, a little money there. But if you only get $50,000 or $100,000, your study's not going to go very far. So we need more government funding. It's really interesting that, you know, when AIDS, and you're too young to remember the AIDS epidemic, the best way I can describe it to you is like COVID times 10. The fear of AIDS. In the very beginning in 1981, when it was first started being talked about, we didn't know how you got it. We didn't know anything. We didn't know if you would get bit by a mosquito and get it. People were scared to death of AIDS because it was one of those diseases where the people that were getting it were getting sick very quickly and dying and dying and dying. And in the beginning, there was a lot of controversy over what is this. They finally decided it was a virus. It took them a while just to even decide that. Once they decided it was a virus, then you had all these different camps of people that were looking for, well, how do you treat this? And there was this side and there was that side, and they were warring with each other over, no, it's got to be this drug and it's got to be that drug. And so there was no continuity in the treatment until the science kicked in. And once we got the research going, and sad to say, the research was really propelled by the fact that so many famous people in the music world or the art world.
Basketball.
Yes, basketball. I will never forget the day I heard the announcement. I can even think of where I was when I heard the announcement that Magic Johnson had AIDS. That was like, wow. I was sitting in my car listening to the radio going, wow. So it wasn't until the really famous got the attention of the media, that got the attention to think, we gotta figure out what this is, that the funding began to pour in. And now funding for AIDS research is just tremendous.
Yeah.
And we have all the answers. We have a unified medical community now who agrees with how AIDS should be treated. It's like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
You don't have to like search out doctors who might know this, or you don't have to travel 6 states over to find somebody. People now know it. There's a standard of care. There's a definition of the disease. We know what AIDS is. We know what HIV is. And so that's what I envision will happen for Lyme disease, chronic Lyme disease in the future. I wish it were happening today. I wish it had happened 5 years ago. But if we're lucky, it'll happen in the next 20 years. The AIDS epidemic, it happened a lot quicker. Maybe they needed 10 to 15 years to get to those answers with research. We could get there if we had the funding. We have major researchers who want to do this and just don't have the means. Their hands are tied because they only get small budgets from their universities.
Yeah. If people listening are interested in helping out or learning more information, where can they go to look?
I say to Google ILADS, ILADS, that's the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society. A lot of good general information right there that can get you pointed in the right direction. There are great books that have been written one of my favorite doctors who's been early on in this epidemic was Dr. Richard Horowitz, who has a practice in the Hudson Valley of New York. And the Hudson Valley was an area that got hit by this a lot sooner than the rest of the country. So he's kind of been behind this epidemic for probably 20 years already. And he's written several really good books. His book that I like is How Can I Get Better? And it details what Lyme is and what the science was telling us at the time he wrote the book. Now the science has improved even since then, but it's a good explanation. So you can go to the library. I know Carroll County Library has copies of this book, How Can I Get Better? By Dr. Richard Horowitz. That's just a great start. But if you Google, there's just a lot of good information more now than there ever used to be. And one thing can lead you to another thing. And again, I'm so happy to talk to anybody who wants to reach out to me after this podcast. This is what I do now. I had to retire from my career in real estate. I was really enjoying it. I specialized on helping people find their dream homes or second homes on the Parkway in particular, vacation homes. And I loved that job. I loved the people that I met and I enjoyed doing it. But I had to give up doing that when my son was so sick because I couldn't commit to the job and be gone for the amount of hours that I needed to be gone to do the job effectively. But I would say that they can get involved by the Googling of the research now of what's happening at Tulane University, what's happening at Johns Hopkins, and even just looking at ILADS. There's a great alliance that was started by a patient herself, and she has developed just this huge network of practitioners that are big names like Dr. Horowitz that are involved. It's called the Global Lyme Alliance. And you can Google them also for lots of great information.
And if someone wants to contact you directly, how should they go about doing that?
Oh man, let's email because that's probably the easiest way. That's what I was saying a minute ago when I had to give up working as a realtor, which I was really enjoying, and become just a researcher to basically save my own kid. I had to just become this massive researcher. And at one point I was reading and researching so much that I got eye strain. Had to go get my prescription changed in my glasses because I was doing nothing but reading. He was sleeping 18 hours a day and I was reading while he was sleeping. And I was just trying to gather information and read the studies and find out who are the people that really know about this, who are the people that are on the cutting edge of what the science is showing us. And so I literally started sitting at my computer in the beginning on a laptop because I would be within 6 feet of him because he was so sick, and I would be on a laptop quietly the whole time he was sleeping. And then that, eventually I moved over to my desktop and I developed a whole office around this. I had to kick my husband out of our home office because my stuff started to take over the office so much, and I literally required 2 desks for all the books and research papers and notes and binders of information that I keep. And so email is the best way for people to reach me because I am on the computer and I will get back to people. Anybody who emails me and wants to have more information. The email address is October 22_US@yahoo.com.
Okay. And I can put that in the description.
You can
too.
definitely put that in the description for people, and I'm happy to talk to anybody. Basically, what ended up happening over time is that I went to Facebook, I found social media, and found communities of people who were doing what I was doing, trying to get answers, trying to figure things out, and I would always look for the people who would comment often in the various places I went, and you start to develop a sense of who really has done the homework and knows more than I do, and I would reach out to those people, and I would latch onto them, and I would, basically, tell me what you know that I don't know, and that eventually meant people coming behind me doing the same to me and saying, tell me what you don't know, I need these answers. And I eventually created a Facebook group, two in particular. One is dedicated to Bartonella, which, like I said, can be a standalone disease or can come with Lyme disease, and it has its own particular issues and problems that are just as miserable as Lyme, but different. And then another group that was dedicated just to Lyme disease. And those groups have thousands and thousands of members in them now. And I continue to admin them with two other co-admins. And over time, I've had to learn how to manage my time so that I'm not sitting at the computer all day long, but I am effectively getting to people's questions and, adminning my group and making sure things are moving smoothly like they should. People are getting sent in the direction of the information they're looking for in particular. And along with that, I spend a little time every day helping as many people as I can. I answer questions on email, I answer questions on Facebook Messenger, and for people who really occasionally need more than just that, I will take phone calls. I try to limit my time on phone calls because you can end up spending several hours talking to somebody, and my time just doesn't, it's just not, I'm not designed that way that I could literally sit on the phone all day because I need to have a life too. Yeah. And that was one thing along this way of my son being, sick and disabled, is that it began to disturb him that this was my whole life. And he was like, Mom, come up for air. You got to breathe a little bit. This can't be everything you do. And he was right. I needed more balance. And so now I try to limit myself to getting on my email, checking and answering questions 2 hours in the morning, maybe 2 hours in the evening, but sometimes not that much. So if I don't get back with somebody on the same day they write to me, they can know that I will get back to them, within usually a day or so. But I do try to have more of a balance in my life now and not have this be my whole life like it really had to be when he was critically ill. He's now at that stage where he's a stabilized person. He's got disabilities from what the disease did to his body, but he's not dying. He's not critical like he was for the first 3 years he was sick.
Well, thank you, Ms. Simms, for all of your information. I do have two more questions that I like to ask every interviewee.
Sure.
The first one is, what advice do you have to the younger generation, people my age, 16, 17, 18, who don't know what they want to do in life?
Oh man, that is such a great question. I would say what you want to do is leave yourself open to all possibilities. Even if you think you know what you want to do, I can almost guarantee you it's not going to be what you end up doing. Every high school class has that kid who knows he's going to be a doctor, and he goes off and he becomes a doctor, and that's great. But the vast majority of us that we're in high school, the things we thought we would do are not the things we end up doing. And you find your way to the thing you end up doing by trying lots of different things. Don't close down your options. If somebody invites you to go to the 4-H agricultural show and you're like, I don't care about animals, why would I want to go do that? You might discover something about yourself that you didn't know you really even liked doing by just doing new things. Sure. So stay open to invitations to do things that present themselves to you. And you may find that you surprise yourself with an interest you didn't even know you had.
Wonderful. And my second question, it's a little bit of a cliche, but that is, what is the meaning of life to you?
Ooh, the meaning of life to me, I think, for me, is to leave this world a better place than you found it. And you feel better when you're not so focused on yourself. So if you can be involved with others and other causes and other people, you leave a mark, or at least I hope I will have left a mark when I leave this world, by focusing more on what I could do for other people and worrying less about my own, stuff.
Sure.
So leave a mark. Let people, when you're gone, let people remember you for a long time afterwards.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you, Ms. Simms. I greatly appreciate your time today, and I appreciate you raising awareness about this terrible disease and hopefully helping some people in the process.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me.